Recently, University of Colorado professor Ward Churchill has been in the news for his comments on victims of the 9/11 terrorist attacks. Last night he spoke in Boulder, Colorado, to a crowd of about 1,200 students and other supporters. He's introduced by Native American activist and actor Russell Means. This is about an hour and 10 minutes.
Thank you, my relatives. I want to first apprise you, before I introduce the many accomplishments of Ward Churchill among my people. We are the only ethnic group in the world that has to prove our degree of blood, like the dogs and the horses. It is because we live on America's concentration camps, the little Iraqs called reservations, you know? We also don't have control of our natural resources. And the corporate might has been ripping us off from day one. That's part of the books and part of the education that Ward has given to not only to the university and its generations of students, but throughout the country and indeed throughout the world. I want you to know that we are forbidden from choosing who are our Indian people by the United States government. My own twin brothers were 32 years of age, and it was only after the American Indian movement, and one of the leaders being Ward Churchill in the late 70s, got the right to be enrolled on my father's reservation, where I am enrolled. I wonder how many of Clear Channel columnists and naysayers are going to condemn my brothers for not being Indian. Ward is my brother. Ward has followed the ways of indigenous people worldwide. If you do not believe so, then go to Geneva, Switzerland, to the United Nations Office of the Working Group of Indigenous Peoples, and you will find out that we, as one people in the world, we say, if you know your ancestry, then you are who you say you are. In the writings of Adolf Hitler, he began his idea of separation by race and sexual preference by following and reading about the Indian policy of the United States of America. And he wrote in Mein Kampf, or in other writings, that it was a good idea to put people on reservations, hence his labor camps, hence which became concentration camps. And he classified people they did not want by race. Apartheid South Africa in 1964 passed the Bantu Development Act 30 years after the United States government passed the Indian Reorganization Act. Read them both. The act that institutionalized apartheid by race and degree of blood in South Africa was literally copied from the Indian Reorganization Act of the United States. Both of those governments no longer exist. And you have these corporate minions from Clear Channel and the corporate media telling us who is our Indian leaders, telling me that my leader is not an Indian because he hasn't been adequately registered. Now, I'm happy to understand the media can't answer any questions here, ask questions. And because if Silverman was going to ask a question, I was going to demand he show me his proof of Jewish blood before he could ask a question. Now understand our struggle. Ward Churchill has understood it, and you only have to read his dozens of essays and almost 24 books that he's written. I know the regents aren't going to get through them all. Those cowards. Those cowards that cannot stand up for women and cannot stand up for their own professors. Ward has received many honors from the non-Indian world. But the biggest honor and the only honor we can give him, and we have for dozens of years, is to make him what we call in my language, Nacha, a leader, a statesman. And he's gone around the country with that label. And it is a true label. And I don't care what Clear Channel says about, or the internet says about his 16th or 3/16ths. Here's where it counts. And his writings are proof. I cannot convey to you the amount of pride we have in Ward Churchill and the amount of pride he gives us. The sovereignty that he gives us so that we can walk tall. Our young people, to this very day, and you just heard one here tonight, student here, that is walking tall because of Ward Churchill and the effect he's had on not only Indian policy, but on the minds of the young people who are activists throughout our country, from coast to coast and beyond borders. The American Indian movement, when we had a together leadership, we appointed him as an ambassador. And he traveled internationally representing us and all Indian people because we are a free people. So I want, from this day forward, every media person nationally, internationally, and locally to know that we have ascertained that Ward Churchill is a full-blooded Indian leader. Thank you.
Hello, my relatives. You humble me. Bill Owens. Do you get it now? If you can count on your toes, you'll be able to count the percentage points of contribution to the budget of the University of Colorado you and your ilk have reduced your taxpayer contribution to. It comes to 7. I do not work for the taxpayers of the state of Colorado. I do not work for Bill Owens. I work for you. That's my institutional role, and I take it very seriously. I take the institution and its well-being, its mission, and its ability to perform that mission very seriously. That's one piece. That's where I am, and that's who has invited me to speak. But here is another reality. I am not an abstract, detached academic. I have responsibilities and grounding in an actual community. I take those responsibilities very seriously. In fact, they are preeminent. I don't answer to Bill Owens. I don't answer in the sense that they think I do to the Board of Regents. The Board of Regents should do its job and let me do mine. And if Tom Lucero and his friends want to debate the propriety of that, I welcome them to come and join an open dialogue. I have not yet been officially informed they were even having a meeting about me. I read it in the Rocky Mountain News. I watch it on TV. I understand I'm being reviewed. I haven't been notified of that in any official sense either. But my preeminent, as I said, is I come from an actual community, and I have responsibilities to that community. And it comes from what I was taught and the values that were imparted to me within that community. And a peace. It comes from a Muskogee elder by the name of Philip Deere, which some of you older people in the room may actually even have heard speak on this campus. He was a very important man. And he gave me a certain instruction at one point, which had to do with the way I was raised, which was outside of my tradition. It was in my 20s before I was allowed the opportunity, given the nature of the experience of my people at the hands of the United States. I was in my 20s before I was given any opportunity to make a direct connection. And Philip said that can be to your advantage. You understand our ways. You did not grow up in them. You understand them. You understand the values. You understand the issues. And you are able to frame those because of the way you were raised in terms that are understood by others. And it's your job. You take that which the Creator gave you and you follow that path. You make your words your weapons and you say things that you understand to be true and you understand them clearly and you never ever back up. And that's what I do. That is consistent with the Muskogee tradition. It's consistent with the tradition of every person on this stage. And you know what? It's also consistent with the tradition of Thomas Jefferson and of Kwame Nkrumah and of any number of people from different cultures where integrity and truth are valued. This is held as an ideal. We share that in common. We share that in common in terms of an aspiration, but we also share that in common as an obligation. Now, a number of things have been imputed to me. But what shall I call this? The Boulder, Denver equivalent of the National Enquirer at this point, or the Star. Couldn't make the case on the issue, and so now my pedigree becomes the issue. Can you call me? I got a very important question. I get a call today from an unregistered Irishman. Okay? Very important question. Can you put me in touch with some of your buddies from Vietnam? We're going to send a film crew to your high school. These people haven't seen me in 40 years. They have nothing to do with this. The issue was not sustainable, so I am to become the issue. Well, later for that. My identity does not come from some punk editorial page editor at the Rocky Mountain News or the Boulder Daily Camera. I am the man, it is said on the talk shock radio in the Denver area, who has called for the deaths of millions of Americans. Someone show me where I said that. I am the man who has justified what I consider to be natural and inevitable. You do not justify the natural or the inevitable. You make comment on it. You don't have to advocate it. You don't have to justify it. You simply point to it. No, I did not call a bunch of food service workers, janitors, children, firefighters, and random passers-by little Eichmanns. It says clearly in that passage, which perhaps I should have amplified further in terms of the connotation of Eichmann, because I understood people would understand as I did what Eichmann symbolized, but apparently not. It says clearly in that passage, the reference is to a technical core of empire, the technicians of empire. Someone want to give me a coherent definition by which someone who is 18 months old, or someone who serves food for a living, or someone who pushes a broom, or someone who is trying to save people in the building, or someone who was just walking by becomes a technician of any sort. Obviously, I was not talking about these people. I was talking about some very specific technical cadre who make this particular system hum, and I'm going to come back to that in a second. But the people at issue, and these are the only people who have been raised. The construction is fairly clear. I've been told it was a bad rhetorical device. Well, I don't think so. You got a better rhetorical device, go use it. Make people think about this your way. This was mine. The people at issue on that red herring would be referred to by Don Rumsfeld or Schwarzkopf, and the other people who stand at the podiums in official fora to make pronouncements in behalf of the federal government of the United States. Those people, those firefighters, those service workers, those children would be referred to as something called collateral damage, not even as human beings. And that was implicit to the formulation. But now let me come back a little bit to what my argument actually was. Once the diversion to one phrase out of one sentence, out of one 20-page essay, out of 24 published volumes, 70 book chapters, and 100 jury journal articles. That one little phrase. I'll come back to it. What did I really say? And why did I say it? Well, there were certain questions being posed on the day I wrote that essay. Before the buildings even came down, and I watched it in real time, I heard the whole thing described as senseless. Not it seems senseless, it might be senseless, no. Here's how you're to frame and understand this. It's senseless. And I'm saying to myself, how could they possibly know this? Did they arrange it? No, I'm not making that accusation. The point is clear, however, they couldn't possibly know that it was senseless. Senseless means to have no purpose. You really believe that this operation was carried out for no purpose. You can agree with the purpose, you can disagree with the purpose, but you can't rationally consign this to having no purpose whatsoever. What might that purpose be? Well, I come from a certain context, I come from a certain set of experiences. They're real experiences, they're not abstract experiences. And based on those experiences, I do a little kid's game called dot to dot. This dot connects to that dot, connects to that dot, and hey, if you connect the dots, you get a pattern, and actually on that pattern you start to understand something. Let me take the first dot. Okay? You were addressed by someone from the Pine Ridge Reservation few moments ago. There's a county on the Pine Ridge Reservation, Shannon County. Shannon County has been the absolute poorest county in the United States for 50 of the last 50 years. And by poorest, I don't mean unable to afford to get the new color TV, gee whiz, I can't trade my truck. I'm talking about a per capita income of less than $3,000 per year to try to survive South Dakota winters. I'm talking about an unemployment rate that runs into the 90th percentile every year. I'm talking about a life expectancy that's 1/3 shorter, generation in, generation out, than the average American. 1/3 truncation of a lifespan, and that's the overall data with regard to reservation-based native North America. Urban-based is not appreciably better. That's 35th percentile attrition of the population every generation for the last 5 generations. I don't know how you define a genocidal impact of a policy imposition, but that comes real close in my book. Okay, I call it genocide. It comes to a degree of impoverishment that results in a continuous dome of death from malnutrition, nutritionally related diseases, continuous tone of death and immiseration from readily communicated diseases. I'm talking about a third world degree of impoverishment of an entire people based on the racial definition imposed on us by the federal government of the United States in behalf of its imagined constituency, which includes everybody else. Not on an even playing field, but in gradients. And the degree of impoverishment devolves from something called plenary power that the federal government has assigned itself. If there's any law professors in the room, you'll know what I'm talking about. Plenary power, in plain English rather than legalese, means absolute, unchallengeable power to make disposition of our affairs and our assets. And with that, they've assigned themselves a trust authority over those assets. When those assets are exploited by American corporations, they're exploited at a discount royalty rate, discount deep, 90%. They paying 10 cents on the dollar what they'd be paying on the open market for the minerals, and the money does not go to the people whose minerals they were. It's placed in trust accounts administered by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. You want to know where Indian destitution comes from? You want to know why our lifespans are truncated accordingly? You want to know why our children are so desperate that they are committing suicide at 14 times the national average? You want to know why all those things come together? Right now there's a case in the federal courts, Cobell, in which it is conceded that the Bureau of Indian Affairs, in combination with the Treasury Department of the United States government, has misplaced $150 billion worth of assets. Cash, money. By federal count, there's 2 million Indians. You want to divide 2 million into $150 and see what our standard of living would be if it wasn't being spent on designer overpasses, if it wasn't being spent on the accoutrements of the quality of life that every American yuppie has decided that they are divinely entitled to enjoy. Does that make me angry? Yeah, it does. Churchill's angry. He speaks angrily. He speaks forcefully. I don't think the issue, however, is why Churchill would be angry about that. The question is why Governor Bill Owens and the Board of Regents are not. And they've had nothing to say of it. And I linked that up in my mind to what was then pronounced to be approximately 565,000 Iraqi children who had died needlessly in less than 5 years. By needlessly, they too were dying of nutritionally related illnesses. They too were dying of readily curable diseases because of a set of sanctions that the United States foisted off on the pretext of it being UN and imposed in order to make the people themselves scream to the point where they would compel their leadership to become free, as defined by George Herbert Walker Bush, meaning to understand that what we say goes. This was no mystery. This was an official UN report. It was confirmed. It was known to be confirmed by Madeleine Albright, U.S. ambassador at the time to the United Nations, on no less public a venue than 60 Minutes in 1996. Leslie Stahl asks her, "Are you aware of this? These 500,000 plus children of another people?" And she says, "Yes, we're aware. We've decided it's worth the price. It's worth the price in somebody else's children to ensure that they get the message that what we say goes." And I thought about my brother Russell Means in 1982 when we were engaged in a physical occupation of a piece of ground outside Rapid City. I learned from Russ too, not just Philip Deer. That was 1982. That was the time of the Battle of Beirut. And they had the PLO fighters sealed in and they were bombarding Beirut. And they were going to kill Arafat. Okay, they had a quid pro quo arrangement where he could go for sanctuary if he could leave. But no one would take him. And Russ convened a press conference and he said something that had to be pretty close to this. The Palestinians of North America offer sanctuary to the American Indians of the Middle East. We have that relationship. Those dots are connected. Now, I was picking that up on 911, basically in stream of consciousness, because they were asking this question, how could this happen? Why do they hate us? And my response is, look at this. How could they not? Every Palestinian child shot in the head for throwing a rock in the Intifada is being shot with munitions provided by the United States. The munitions are fired from a rifle provided by the United States. When they look up and see those helicopters that are taking out apartment blocks because they suspect somebody they don't like is in there, collateral damage ensues. The helicopter and the missile are provided by the taxpayers of the United States. And see, the problem is not just that the material, the monetary support and the political endorsements provided by the government of the United States, but there's this overwhelming embrace of the policy by the general citizenry of the United States. And this tallies. This tallies in tens and scores and hundreds of thousands and then millions and tens of millions of darker-skinned others being piled up in the name of profit maximization, stability for the strategic interest and ultimately economic interest of the United States. Actually, I talked about chickens coming home to roost after Malcolm X. But these chickens, I said, were more like ghosts. And I talked about those ghosts. The Iraqi ghost first, the children. But then there's another 500,000 adults in a country of 20 million people. And I talked about the Palestinians. And I talked about the Grenadans. And I talked about the Panamanians. And I talked about the Salvadorans and Nicaraguans. And I talked about the Guatemalan upland Mayans. And I talked about the bodies that were stuffed in the well at Nogonri. And I went backwards from Korea to a couple of nuclear bombings. We're worried about weapons of mass destruction in the country that has the largest inventory in the world and the only country that has ever used them on civilian targets and intentionally on civilian targets. And pointed it out that while the nukes are best known, they weren't the worst of it. Curtis LeMay's carefully orchestrated fire raids conducted in the spring of 1945 in Tokyo, in one night alone they inflicted 110,000 casualties, cremated civilians intentionally. They built burn zones out in Utah to figure out the best way to ignite wood and paper cities. This was deliberate, intentional. This was a matter of policy. Probably 500,000 Japanese were burned alive in the process of sending the message that they too would understand that what we say goes.
That's terrorism.
And back to the liberation of the Philippines from the Spanish Empire to make it an American colony, and the deaths of 600,000 to 1.5 million so-called Moros, a pejorative term. Tagalog speakers called the Indians of the Philippines. Entire provinces deliberately cleared of population by virtue of liquidating them. Orders signed by American military leadership to kill every single male over 10 years of age. Oh yeah, they didn't teach you that in high school history, did they? And Bill Owens doesn't want you taught about that now. And that happened 10 years after Wounded Knee. And the reconstituted 7th Cavalry and Hotchkiss guns and disarmed and immobilized people butchered in the snow and dumped into a mass grave. And I actually used the imagery from Wounded Knee in a book on comparative genocide, juxtaposing the dumping of the bodies into the mass grave at Wounded Knee and the dumping of the bodies into mass graves by the Einsatz group and in Eastern Europe. And people sometimes get them confused, which is which. The symbolism and the reality are fused. The reality is what's at issue. And taking that string of massacres, running all the way back to when a group of people now known as the Wappinger, who supposedly sold Manhattan Island to the Dutch for a handful of glass beads and trinkets, objected to the idea that they'd sold their land because what they understood they did was accept rental payment for use of a particular portion of Manhattan Island as a trading center which they could do business with the Dutch. And the Dutch, who knew fully well that this had not been a sale but rather a rental, resolved the issue by sending a military expedition up the island to dispense with the Wappingers, doing so rapidly that they felt that no one would believe how successful they'd been when they went back, so they took the heads of the fighting age males and the leadership and carried them back in woven baskets to display, to make proof of the fact that they had butchered the lot. And the citizenry was so happy they gathered round to watch a jolly sporting contest, kickball, in which the heads of the slain owners of the land were used as the ball. Roughly on a place where the foundation of the World Trade Center was situated. That's the history of the place, which sits approximately at the end of Wall Street. We know about Wall Street in terms of its economic importance, its influence, its symbolic value. What most of us don't know is it takes its name from the wall of the slave enclosure which formed the economy of the city, which is now considered the economic hub of empire. That's the history, and those ghosts, those transatlantic ghosts, were there too. And the Chinese that laid the track on the railroad and did the deep shaft mining, who had not a Chinaman's chance of surviving, yeah, that's where that term comes from. Oh yeah, they were all there. There was a load of karma due. And what I said was, when you treat people this way, when you kill their babies as a matter of course and say it has no consequence, when you devalue, demean, and degrade others to this point, naturally and inevitably what you're putting out will blow back on you, and that's what happened on that day. And the question was on everybody's lips as they whined innocent American as if they had fused it into all one word. If we're American, by definition, we're innocent no matter what it is we do in the world, what we embrace, what the consequences are. We're Americans, we're innocent, we're consequential, they're valueless. Get the symmetry straight. How do we keep ourselves safe from this sort of thing coming back? Oh, how could they do this? They hate our freedom, they're evil. Tiger cages in Guantanamo Bay, licensing of torture techniques, which we have Harvard constitutional lawyers now arguing should be permissible. The cloning of more and more Delta units, commando teams, assassination squads, counterterrorism, wanding of people. They wanted me apparently to see that I wouldn't commit suicide while standing at the podium tonight. And actually, I've got my .357 terrorism weapon right here in my belt for all the good it did. Impounding my tweezers did not save anyone. Who heard the last time an aircraft was kidnapped by a terrorist using tweezers, plucking the eyebrows of a frantic stewardess in order to... I mean, that's the level of insanity we are. When you get serious about security, and in some aspects of it, our security, you think that's going to work against people who are embittered and hate you for the very good reason that you're butchering their children with presumed impunity? Ask the Israelis. They've got the most highly perfected and developed security state on the planet, and you got 14-year-old kids walking in there with bundles of dynamite and blowing them right out of cafes. You want to put your well-being and that of your children on a system and a structure and a set of priorities like that, go ahead, but count me and mine out, okay? If you want to be secure, if you want to be able to live a human life in all of its full dimension, if you want to have the security of that to pass it along to your children, if you want to be valued, in other words, as a human being, I don't want to get biblical here, but do unto others as you would expect to have done unto yourself. That's my first proposition. If you want to be secure from that natural and inevitable response to what it is that America's putting out in the world, start with stopping killing of their babies. Accord them the fundamental dignity of being human, not collateral damage. And America's been able to provide the world with an endless stream of glowing rhetoric, but how on that basis, since they've violated all of it, since they've always said one thing and acted precisely the opposite, is anyone out there going to believe anyone here if those assurances are made? Here's my real crushing blow. This is the radical finale of the whole thing. Let's just try pretending for a moment that the United States of America, like every other entity on the planet, is bound to obey the law. That's my argument, reduced to its bare bones. I can flesh it out in Q&A. I'm not the Board of Regents. We will have interchange. You will not be arrested for attempting to engage in it. But understand, since that it is what it was that I had to say, and I had every right, indeed the obligation, not only as a citizen, but under the terms of my contract and as a human being, I'm not backing up an inch. I owe no one apology. Clarification's one thing. Clarification is one thing, that's my job too. Apology is another. But those who have been trying to elicit that in some cases, I think, have simply been asking the wrong question, wanting to know if I experienced sorrow or mourning, something like that with regard to the children who died on the aircraft and in the buildings of 911 that day. And the answer is yes, of course. And for the firefighters, and for the food service workers, and for the broom pushers, and for the random passersby, yeah. I do. And it's absolute, and it's unequivocal, and it's not one whit more proportionately significant than the mourning, the sorrow I experience for every single one of those Iraqi children, for every single one of those Palestinian children. none of whom have been mentioned in the criticism in any way at all. It's a one-track record leading back to the 9/11 victims and nothing else. I even had an Air Force colonel tell me about the last group of people who had in a civilian-occupied facility, meaning the hijackers on 9/11. Afghanistan and Iraq either didn't happen or the people there weren't. And I can show you that email. And he meant it seriously. He did not mean it maliciously. That is a genocidal mentality. That is the core of the problem. When I start hearing equal sorrow for those brown-skinned others out there dying in the millions, maybe we're getting to some place where all the children will be safe and all the people will be safe. And I learned from where I am. I am not Cheyenne, but this is Cheyenne land, and I've been here as long as many of you have been alive, and I learned something about their ways. It's about the picket pin or stake. Sometimes you stand out because there's an attack coming, and you stake yourself to the ground so you can't gut out, you can't retreat. That's your statement. It comes with red paint. Well, there's no red paint here, literally, but see it now. I drove my picket stake. My picket pin is in. I'm staked out. There is not an inch of give in this. Not at this level of whether I get to speak, what I say when I speak, or what the function of this institution is. All right? This institution needs to be protected from the ravages of the rabid right wing, but it has to be protected on grounds that save the institution itself. With that, I think we got commonality, we got solidarity, we got everything we need to prevail and keep this institution what it is that it's supposed to be and actually to improve it. We can, what kills you, what doesn't kill you, they say, gives you strength. We come out of this stronger and clearer about what our institutional mission and our rights are than we went in the first place. And on that score, we ought to be thanking O'Reilly, we ought to be thanking Joe Scarborough, we ought to be thanking Kevin Flynn, we ought to be thanking the yo-yos in the local paper, and we ought to be thanking the Board of Regents and Governor Owens as well. Matakaasi. You all give me hope. You all give me hope. Power to the people. Let's take these in no particular order, not feeling greatly professorial at the moment. So you got a question, just rotate among yourselves back and forth as it was requested. Keep them short so more questions can be asked.
I'll go ahead.
Go ahead.
My name is Shelley Benson. I had a question.
Yeah.
One of the issues that have not been discussed in recent discourse is the question of freedom of speech and academic freedom, and what this means especially in a university system where ideas are supposed to be discussed openly and freely. Would you please add comments to this?
Yeah, I will in summary, but I'll refer you to a document that's central to this institution called the Rules of the Regents of Colorado. Okay? And it says quite specifically in intent and definition section that any faculty member that says anything is explicitly to be protected from political repercussions of what it is they said. That is an impermissible gesture to attempt to suppress political speech in any form under the rubric of the University of Colorado. That's not a guideline. That's a matter of law. Yeah, it's not been framed that way, but you need to understand that. That forms the basis of the contract of every faculty member at the institution, tenured or no. You are required to do and permitted to do certain things contractually in accordance with the rules of the regents. It's called contract law. It is legally binding. There is no magic line articulated beyond which one steps, and the people who politically disagree with it are empowered to remove you. That is the absolute fundamental bedrock upon which the academic edifice stands. And I have defended people who I considered to be tending upon Nazi on that basis. And I actually find them useful. They're the perfect foil to my arguments. Let them carry their own case. People need to hear from them in order to form opinions, just like they need to hear from me.
I am not a student. I'm a father of a student.
Thank you.
But I'd like to make a brief statement here. In 1969,
Well, very brief, if you
my
would.
name is Bill Holm. In 1969, I had the honor of sharing the stage with Russell Means at the University of Minnesota Kauffman Center, with him and the Ojibwe and my Lakota brothers as a Vietnam veteran, as a member of the Vietnam Veterans Against the War. It's rather prophetic that we're here, sitting here 30 years later talking about another unjustified war. My concern is I may or may not disagree with you, sir, but I defend the right for you to say whatever you wish to say in terms of academic freedom.
And that's all you need to do. And in the process of that, we can talk, and in the process of talking, both our minds may change. But if we can't talk, if one or the other of us is prevented, that can't happen.
If there is no dialogue, there is war.
Professor Churchill, I'm a grad student here on campus, and perhaps you can clear up a question that I have.
Yep.
Is this attack upon you in any way related to the acquittal of you and the other protesters for the protest Columbus Day?
Funny you should ask. What do you think?
Well, I believe the city is out to get us anyway, but I'd like to hear what you have to say on the matter, please.
Yeah, I was a target of opportunity. The line run on me right now, this is a weird position to be in. Okay, I don't know what their selection process was, but this is the kickoff, and it's been stated by Newt Gingrich, and it's been stated by David Horowitz, and it's been stated by Joe Scarborough, and for that matter, it's been stated by certain members of the Board of Regents and the governor and the legislature of the state of Colorado. This is the opening round in an intended general purge of divergent ideas of which they do not approve. And it's already happening. It was mentioned that there will be a rally for Adrienne Anderson tomorrow. I don't know how many people know the nature of what it is that happened with Adrienne, but her contract was non-renewed despite the fact there was overwhelming student enthusiasm for what it was she was teaching. She was rated by her peers as well as students as an outstanding teacher, including by the guy who deep-sixed her, who noted in a caveat at the bottom of an evaluation that said she is an excellent classroom teacher. She engages the students, compels critical inquiry, and all the rest. But he says, I wonder how this information would be received by the son or daughter of one of the upper division management at Coors. Understand the message. If you're going to offend the offenders, you're not to be allowed to talk about it, which means the offenses are not to be interrogated, examined, understood, corrected. That's the object. That's the Republican agenda as they articulate. And frankly, I don't consider these guys to be Republicans. There's an N word ending in I that I think is more appropriate, but hey, I use that analogy too often. Bill Owen says I'm not qualified for my job. Excellent scholar that he is, overarching authority in the subject matter. calls for my job on that. I should resign, he says, or be fired. Well, I'll return the compliment. At least, Bill, learn how the budget works and how to read the Constitution before you purport to speak in behalf of about half the voters of the state of Colorado who voted against you, buddy. Okay?
I'm glad I came here tonight. I heard a lot more than I heard in the average sound bites I'm hearing on the radio. I agree with some points. There are other points I disagree with, but I do believe you have a constitutional right to say what you have to say. On the other hand, do you agree that the First Amendment rights for the people who march in the Columbus Day Parade should be taken away? Because that is their freedom of expression as well, and I'm one of those people.
Do what you're doing. Let me answer the man. No, I don't believe you have a First Amendment right because that bounces off against my Ninth Amendment right. Do you know what my Ninth Amendment rights are? Do you know what the Ninth Amendment says?
No, sir.
Yeah. Do we have a law professor in here? I think this is a lesson for the law school because I addressed another university auditorium with about this many people in it last week, and I posed the same question to the whole group. Professors, students, townspeople, and all, not a soul, including law professors, could tell me what the damn Ninth Amendment said. Suppose there might be a reason for that?
Does
Yeah,
that
it's one
negate...
sentence long. Oh, you got a hand, got a
Sir,
hand.
sir,
Oh.
sir, does that negate the First Amendment?
Come, wait a minute. Let's get an answer to it. Actually, wrong. What it says in very close paraphrase is all rights not otherwise enumerated herein that inhere in the people are retained by them. Okay? You can have a real entertaining time looking at where the nature of those rights is articulated, and it can be rather nebulous and it can be debatable, but I'll tell you one place you can look where it's not debatable at all, and that's in black letter legal articulation. That goes to human rights, particularly the articulation of international human rights that take the form of ratified treaties under Article 6 of the Constitution of the United States. Those are the supreme law of the land, and among them are fundamental human dignity, okay, and celebration of the conditions that I was describing as pertaining to Native people as an outcome of the process initiated by Christopher Columbus. Celebrating that guy in any respect at all is a celebration of those conditions. That's a denial of fundamental human dignity. That's a denial of my Ninth Amendment rights, and you don't have a right to do that, and you know it's exactly what you're doing.
I beg to disagree respectfully, and I'd love to debate that issue. And my right to be here as an American, who is every much an American as you are, or anybody up on that podium.
We're not going to
I am
debate.
proud
You
of who
asked
I
the
am
question,
and my
I
people.
answered it. Next party. You want
Thank
to
you.
debate, we'll set it up. It'll be separate from this forum.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Ward. Apparently, Dustin over here thought it'd be necessary to send his goonie over here to try to keep me from speaking. But I'm glad he went over here and is letting me speak. Thanks, Dustin.
Speak.
Also,
Speak.
you seem to come down against the technocratic core, as you've called it. You've compared them to little Eichmanns, but not the food service workers, not the janitors and whatnot.
Whoa, speak slower so I can hear you.
All right.
You got time to frame your question. Don't take too much time, but take enough time that I can understand it.
Yes, sir. You seem to come against the technocratic core. The students here, virtually every one of us, we're not training here, we're not studying here to become food service workers or janitors. So are we also little Eichmanns?
That's your choice.
That's
your choice.
What about the men and women in the towers who are your little Eichmanns? Did they all choose to be these little Eichmanns?
That's your choice.
And what,
When you,
out of us, how
Okay.
would we choose not to be a little Eichmann? What would we be saying?
You're not to make a speech, you were to pose a question. You've posed it, I'll answer it. Okay? When you knowingly accept the collateral effects of business practice as usual projected by the United States into the rest of the planet, and even if you don't agree with it, contribute your expertise, your technical ability, your proficiency to furthering the process of extermination of masses of children for your own personal gain and benefit, to fit into the structure without challenging it, you are, in the Hannah Arendt metaphysical sense of Eichmann.
So then, just for clarification,
No, now you're done. You asked the question, I answered the question. Okay, next person.
All right, I guess
That's
if you
the
want
rule.
to
You don't
shirk
have a
your
special
responsibility,
grant, I
you can
won't
go ahead and
deny
do it.
your speech. Same rules for everybody.
Something that rang really true with what your speech is that you don't work for Bill Owens, you work for us. And with that in mind, just like simple consumer, and you are the producer, you supply here. If by chance there was a way to work it out where the consumer could voice their opinion in a voting matter, and whichever way it goes, vote on whether we want you to freely express it, and I have faith looking around, would you accept that decision? If either way, if they...
I don't see how it would work, but you got some concrete plan, you come talk to me. I'm not going to accept something I don't understand on its face. The principle sounds sound, but I don't understand the mechanism.
If by chance it was in the same student elections that happen every year, and granted there's not very high participation, which is a negative sign, would you accept the results?
No, actually, I think I do understand what you're saying, and no, my position, that is my job, my responsibility, my obligation, what I was hired to do is not a popularity contest or subject to the political will of any constituency. I work for you in the sense that 80% of my salary is paid by you at least. The taxpayers subsidize 7%. That's $6,000. The tuition formula here is such that a faculty member teaching 25 student load breaks even institutionally. I teach on average 85. I've returned money to the general fund every year I've taught here. They're in the negative numbers on me, guy. But my obligation to you is to be clear. It's not to equivocate my position or have you remove me if you don't like the position. If you don't like the position, there's other classes. There are students who benefit from mine. Okay, we got about, I don't know, I can't tell how many. I'm going to take about 4 or 5 more questions. There's 5 on this side. And I'm going to quit. I'm basically fatigue grounds. You can hear my voice is going. I've been teaching all day, and I'm starting to get blurry, and I don't want to give incoherent answers. I want to give sharp answers to as many questions as I can and then stand down. So 4, maybe 5, depending on the questions.
I was just wondering, where do you get the gall to call the people who died in 9/11 technocrats when you sit around and get a $90,000 paycheck from the government you purport to hate?
To answer the question. Yo, he's posed a question, I'll answer the question. And it really goes to the question of, hey, sucker, you consider yourself innocent? No. You show me where I ever said. What I said was I tend to fly more on these gigs than the average American, making myself more susceptible to being strapped into a passenger seat on a 300,000-pound cruise missile. I've been every moment of my adult existence in flat-out opposition in every way I knew to the status quo of this country, but I have not changed it, and to that extent, I have not measured up to the responsibility. I am not innocent, and I'm subject to the same penalty, and that's the answer to your question. You don't get a second. You don't get a second.
You do admit your hypocrisy?
Sit down. You apparently don't understand the language to understand I was the opposite of hypocrisy, okay? Over here, sir.
Good evening to you. First and foremost, I want to say that Sharif Aleem couldn't make it. He was a gentleman that was arrested for his attempt, for what they called was a violent act. And I want you to know that we were on the internet looking at it, and even in Saudi Arabia, they've picked it up and they see it and they know that this is a farce, it's a game to get rid of you. Yeah. And I want you to know from New Urban perspective, we down with you, we got your back. We don't choose to be activists by choice. We're forced into it for situations like these for our children. And I just want you to know, I've been to jail with you for the demonstrations on Columbus Day, and I was proud to do it, you know. And I didn't realize until 2 years ago that my grandmother was Navajo, so I got your back more than you know. And for those out here who got problems with it, for lack of knowledge, you perish, and no dollar in this world gonna save you when hell comes to you. Peace be with you, brother.
You tell Sharif, I'll be talking to him tomorrow anyway. I've been trying to get in touch, but it's been hard because these guys consider their livelihood to be my obligation to feed. Not that they ever get anything I say straight anyway.
First, I want to thank you, Dr. Churchill. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hope
Thanks
you
are
forgive me.
not necessary, actually. I appreciate it, but I am simply trying to meet my obligations and responsibilities as best I can. And that's the truth of it.
Forgive me for the prepared statement. I'm just a graduate student. I haven't figured it all out yet, right?
We're going to elect you governor, you keep it up.
Only if you stump for me, Ward. It's with grave
You know what, I'll
urgency.
get you a lot of airtime, bud.
And this is actually for all the folks that have been calling for Ward's head on a pike. It is with grave urgency and humble deference that I approach you at this dark hour. It appears that one of our great scholars, activists, and friends is falling prey to an antiquated government of Winthropianism. Ward Churchill deserves support from the community which he has served with noble courage and pioneering resolve. How can we, the community Dr. Churchill has forged out of his own years and tears, abandon him at the city on the hill, which he has sought to make level for all? I implore you to recall the days when radical women took to the streets demanding their inalienable rights to suffrage. Has history vindicated these women? Or like these women's heroes, Anne Hutchinson and Mary Dyer, is Dr. Churchill to burn? What are those people who seek punitive...
No disrespect, but I
sentence.
got to be same
I'm
rules
down,
for
man.
everybody, okay?
It's a statement.
Not
For those of
supposed
us
to
that
be.
were shut,
Not
for those of
supposed
us
to
that
be.
were shut out at the Regent's office. What are those people who seek punitively to censor and banish the man who has unselfishly for decades advocated and compromised himself for the equality of indigenous Americans, African Americans, and many...
Really, I appreciate it, would like to have a copy, but honestly, can't. Two more, one on each side, okay?
I'll keep it quick, I promise.
Thank you.
I'm here tonight as a student of Ward's, both present and past, and I just want all of the media and all of the students here to know this man is an excellent teacher, and that's why we should be here, and that's why we should be supporting him. I've read just about 10 of his books, and if people actually picked them up, did the readings, and did the research, they'd realize what he's actually about. That's what I just wanted to say.
Thank you.
Good evening, sir. It's a great honor to actually be here and to be able to talk to you. I drove from Laramie to come see you speak because I thought that everything that was being said about you on the news could not be true, because if it was true, you would never have been allowed to teach. I am the type of person, I read the coverage in the paper of the Iraqi people who have been killed, and I almost throw up. I want to ask you, did you ever think that a sentence out of your essay that you had written, out of the volumes that you have written, would ever be taken out of context like this, would ever have been blown out of proportion like this, and that we would be standing here today?
Honest answer to that is no. No, it's a weird position to be in, but it's a position I've been put in, and it's a responsibility that's put in my face, on my shoulders, however you want to look at it, and I'm not going to back away from it. I'm not going to back away from it.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that's fine.
This is sort of a closing thing I was asked to say, and it's something I should have said myself in my talk, so let me back off the podium with this statement. Clarification again, if you will. I ended the piece and I ended my presentation with a call for take your pick, law enforcement or obedience to law. And that begins right here. That begins with the honoring, the obedience to the treaties with the indigenous peoples whose land we all stand on. It begins here. If you can't do that one, you can't do any of them. You do the one that's toughest for you yourself first, and the rest of it's a downhill slide. Get used to the idea. You got to have a lawful right, or you got to have a collaborative interaction with the people whose property you occupy. You can't starve the children to death in the name of a pretension to ownership and jurisdiction over someone else's land.
Does the cowboy have a right to speak?
You would have if you'd been one further up in the queue, guy, but it's over now, so sorry.
You're watching C-SPAN, created as a public service by America's cable television companies. Coming up, President Bush on Iran, Iraq, and the Medicare prescription drug benefit. After that, a hearing on accounting practices at Fannie Mae. And if you missed any of this speech by University of Colorado professor Ward Churchill, we'll show it again at around 1 a.m. Eastern. Tomorrow morning on Washington Journal,